Okay, this is part 5 of emotional behaviors. You can see that this is, like I said, even though this wasn't one of my favorite things to talk about early on in my career, this has become something that I've enjoyed talking about more and more. And so I need to finish up with escape behaviors as we were in the middle of attack and escape behaviors. And then I'm going to ask you to spend the extra 5 minutes or so. And if you don't want to, you can just watch the first 10 minutes of the Kelly McGonigal, but I think you'll finish it up. How to make stress your friend. So the very last module of all of this is about stress and health, and I will do a very short sliver of that on Monday, talking about the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis and how over time that kind of stress can influence our health. But I feel like watching the Kelly McGonigal is sort of more important in this realization that we can use stress to be beneficial as long as we are thinking about it in the right way and then responding to it in the right in appropriate ways that actually can make us healthier.
And as I said, so we're talking about the amygdala, and we've talked about some attack behaviors, and now we're going to talk about fear and anxiety, and we're going to stay in the amygdala. And it's good to start out by explaining the Moreau reflex, as we're going to look at this startle response. The Moreau reflex when we're babies is, if you've seen the little Albert study, you've seen this. When we have a really loud noise, the baby's startle response is a Moreau reflex, where they kind of throw up their hands and arch their back and cry. As we get older, we don't throw up our hands and arch our back and cry, but we maintain a startle response. And I'm going to go ahead and tell my story of, I tell a few stories on myself here as we get into overactive amygdala. So when I was in graduate school, I took an eye movements and cognition class, and my professor was going to show us how when you have the loud clap, and so I was on the eye tracker, that your pupils get larger, and that's part of our startle response. I jumped, so nobody saw my pupils get large. That it was a really intense startle response, and people have different intensities of their startle response. But what we typically see is we have this auditory information, goes into the cochlear nucleus in the medulla, and some of that information gets sent directly to the pons. And if you remember, the pons when we're sleeping is stopping the muscles from moving. When we get a loud noise, the pons is going to command the neck muscles to tense. So if you can get somebody to stand behind you and kind of clap or do something when you're not really expecting it, you can, and you notice and think about it, you'll feel the tension in your neck. We don't learn to fear loud noises. This is something we are born with, but our moods and the current situation can modify our reactions. And I've already just discussed how there are individual differences in the way we react as well. The amygdala plays an important role in classical conditioning. So if you remember, I went through this really early on with my different brain regions when we talked about neuroanatomy. And if you put on the first exam that the amygdala, and you just put fear, I said that's not enough. There's more to this, as the amygdala is not just involved in fear and aggression and anger. The amygdala is involved with other emotions, and it is it's important, plays an important role in classical conditioning. And so all of this is really strongly intertwined, right? I'm going to try and stick with, if I'm seeing a light and getting shocked, I'm being classically conditioned to where when I see that light, I'm going to have an anxiety response, even when I'm not shocked, right? I'm classically conditioned to have this negative response to seeing that light. If I'm going to hear a sound and I get food, or get something sweet or something pleasant, I'm going to use food, because that's what they do with animals. If I hear a sound and get food, pretty soon as I hear that sound, I'm going to have this relaxation response and probably some salivation and so forth as well, right? As this classical conditioning. And that kind of learning is taking place thanks to the amygdala. So we see an effect of classical conditioning on the startle response. Again, the startle response itself is not learned. That's something we're born with. But whether or not, so if I've been seeing a light and getting shocked, now if I see a light and I hear the loud noise, my startle response is going to be larger. If I've been hearing a sound and getting food, I'm going to hear that sound and then hear the loud noise, and my startle response is going to be lessened. So what they've found is that damage in the path from the amygdala to the hindbrain, that we still see a normal startle response. Again, the startle response is not learned. That's going to be something we have. But those signals of danger or safety, they don't modify the reflex in the same manner. So that's damage from the path from the amygdala to the hindbrain. And I want to go through some of these nuclei, these areas of the amygdala. So in the lateral and basolateral areas, it looks like that's where we are taking in that information, that visual and auditory information, so just that sensory information from the world. And then we're relaying that information to the central amygdala, and the central amygdala is putting that together with information from the thalamus coming in about pain and stress. And so as we learn to have a fear, we're going to strengthen the connections on this route from the lateral basolateral areas to the central amygdala. That's going to be strengthened with learning of fear. So it's those areas of the amygdala, and here's a nice picture that shows the amygdala, and then you can see how, again, how connected it is with the hippocampus. And you can also see this small band of fibers, the stria terminalis, and I'm going to now talk about the bed nucleus of the stria terminalis up there. As we get this long-term generalized emotional arousal, so if we are having a more generalized arousal or a generalization of fear responses, this appears to influence or be influenced by the bed nucleus of the stria terminalis. So people with a lot of activity there are going to have more generalized fear responses. We might talk about this as one example of this would be people who have PTSD, right? They're going to have a really overactive bed nucleus of the stria terminalis. Some of what we know about what the amygdala does for us comes from work with monkeys, where they gave them this Kluver-Bucy syndrome, where they had bilateral damage, damage to both of the amygdalae in the brain, and they became much more tame and placid. They showed no fear. He's showing here a monkey who has no fear of a snake after having the Kluver-Bucy syndrome. They have impaired social behaviors. Part of this is just not knowing when to show some caution as they are approaching other monkeys. They show retrograde and anterograde amnesia, so amnesia for things that have happened before the damage and for laying down new memories. They have some visual agnosia, which we talked about when we talked about perception of just not recognizing what objects are. They show changes in eating behavior, but to some extent this is talking about hyperorality, that they tend to put a lot of things in their mouth to explore things now, which if you think about visual agnosia makes some sense that I don't know what this is, so I'm going to explore this in a different way. And then they show hypersexuality. So I'm going to talk about a human who also has damage to her amygdalae. Okay, I thought I was going to go ahead with the person with amygdala damage, but I've noticed that I have just a little over a minute, and I want to do my stay tuned, and let's do a little bit of a bridge to what's going to happen on Monday. So I have just a little bit left with the amygdala. Actually, I have a lot left, but I'm gonna find some information to take out. I'm going to finish talking about attack and escape behaviors. No books that I know of ever talk about other emotions, and I've always been really proud of myself for putting together just a teeny bit of stuff, and I'm going to even shorten it even more. But we have other emotions, and there's so much less research on them. It's kind of fascinating, but they're not as easy, I guess, to examine. But I definitely want to at least do that for a little bit. I know I'm running over with emotions. I used to. It's ironic. This was my biggest apprehension and fear of teaching, and it has become one of my favorite things to talk about, and I would never have expected it. The first time I taught this class, I asked maybe 4 other people to please teach about emotions for me, and now I just keep putting in more, and I find it really, really fascinating. So I do plan to start learning and memory next time, so I will take out some of the information that is even in the book, and I'm sorry, that's going to be life this time around. So have a good weekend, and take care, be safe. Let me know if you have questions.